Good morning, everybody. Welcome to HealthFlix's global wellness community. And I'd like to start off by saying thank you. Thank you to the Minded Institute, Heather Mason's hard work. I understand she's been working 24/7 for the last 3 weeks at least, just to bring this out into the world. And thanks to all my colleagues and friends and people that I don't know, and people in the back office. Thank you, Luke. Everyone who is here, who's attending, everyone who's presented and making this a facility that we can put out into the world. I feel very privileged to have been invited to talk about the Magic of Fascia. It's a double-edged wand because there's so much. I feel like I'm in MasterChef and I've got to choose my 4 favorite things and tell you about them, because I can talk about fascia for about a week without a break. I think possibly might need to sleep once or twice, but any of you that know me know that. And I'd like to just start with a prayer, if you'd all join me. These are extensions of our hearts, and if we just bring them together and just take one moment to take a lovely easy breath in before we begin, and a lovely gentle exhale. And I would just like to call in the light, the highest light, to say thank you for this possibility of us connecting, to say a prayer of love and of grace to everyone. As daunting and unprecedented as many aspects of this work are, of this time, everyone is doing their best at the time, whatever that is. I want to acknowledge all of those that love, all of those that have lost, all of those that are losing, and all of those that are winning, and ask that this somehow, as difficult as it is to swallow, is the grit that an oyster transforms into a pearl, and that we all come through this time, that humanity comes through this time as a collective, having learned what we needed to learn to make this a better future overall. Amen. And thanking you, whoever it is, whichever the source is, and I'll talk about that, for the grace of our connection. So it is. So one of the things that we've been asked to talk about is how we're staying connected, giving some easy skills for that connectivity. And in terms of the Magic of Fascia, what I want to share with you is, I want to use the word already quite a lot. We're already connected. And one of the magical things about fascia is our tissue of connection. So for those of you that don't know what the fascia is very simply put, part of our collagen matrix. It's part of what forms us. And what we now know about the fascia through recent research is that it's also the largest sensory organ of our body. Grunwald did some work in 2016, I believe, in which it was shown that the fascial matrix, the fabric of all of us, has over 100 million sensory neurons within its architecture. And more recently, Dr. Robert Schleip, Professor Carla Stecco have done research volumizing that measurement. So taking a piece and working out the volume so that we now know there may be more like 250 million sensory neurons. And what that does is it changes everything. It's what we call a paradigm shift. And you've probably heard that phrase from a lot of people talking about fascia. It has literally transformed our ability to understand how everything in this form of us works. We are already connected, and everything in us is already connected. Now, why did we even imagine it wasn't the case? Now that we have modern measuring material that allows us to understand our connection, and we'll talk about that, what had us under a collective spell that we didn't realize that all the parts of us are actually made of one exquisite material that has almost got a mind of its own. So let's look at that. We live, and we still live, under a collective spell, and that spell was cast in the 17th century by the father of modern medicine, who had the best intentions to study the human body. Previously, in most cases, anatomy was carried out on Barbary apes, and there are anatomists before that, but formally, and in those times, the Pope's sanction was essential. The church made human dissection illegal. And Descartes sought sanction for proper research to be done on proper bodies. It wasn't called that then, but let's say, put it like that in our modern idiom. And he went to the Pope to get sanction to dissect cadavers, cadaveric specimens, dead bodies. And he made what Candace Pert in Molecules of Emotion calls a turf deal with the Pope. And that turf deal prescribed our study of the human body. And the deal was the church will have sanction over the invisible forces of the mind, the emotions, the spirit, and the soul, because the church was responsible for the soul's salvation. So it was an act of guardianship, possibly an act of control, but we're not going to get into politics. Descartes, the father of modern medicine, was given jurisdiction over the body. And in that turf deal, the psychology, psyche means soul, the soul, the emotions, the feelings, and the invisible forces of nature, of us, of our anima, animus, the spirit, were separated, and the physical body was allowed to be studied. Now, René Descartes was actually also an horologist. That meant he studied clocks, which is ironic because fascia is our body's timekeeper in some ways. And in that study of clocks, he worked to break down a clock into its component parts. And remember, this was the era of the Industrial Revolution. So putting things together mechanically had him state that the human body functioned and moved like any other automaton. Now that got lost in translation because an automaton, autos, means self, and maton is motivated. So automaton meant a self-motivated thing because a clock moves by itself. Okay, you have to wind it up, you have to feed the human body, but it ticks and functions, and its pendulum swings, and its cogs and wheels are self-motivated. So it's an automaton. And we are clearly self-motivated, therefore calling us automatons was a reasonable deduction. Now, what we've made that mean is that we are mechanical. And what we've made that also mean is that by breaking our form down into its component parts, we can work out how it functions. And what that also meant in the laboratories was that the fascial tissue, which was considered to be inert packaging material, just like paper packaging, kind of fabricy stuff that you just scraped out of the way, was scraped away and thrown into the cadaveric bins. And what was left were the parts. Now imagine with me just for a moment that you've been given a bag of watch parts and you've got a list, think anatomy book, with the name and orientation of every single one of those parts. And that, if you like, is a very intellectual, it's very useful, very clear list of what all those parts are. But there's craftsmanship required to get those parts put together in such a way that we can tell the time. And that symbol is that the church had jurisdiction over the timekeeper. And who put this together? Obviously, in those days, it was God. Hu means divine. Human is divine man. So that was all God's work. And everything else was a question of studying the parts to find out how to put them together to make the whole. We're a long way from telling the time when we work out and learn all the parts of the body. You can speak fluent anatomy. I know many who do. But what studying fascia is allowing us to do is to actually put back together all those parts, find out who the craftsman is, and then begin to tell the time with those parts, because your fascia is actually the blank page upon which your entire body story is written in this multi-dimensional form. You are a volume. And what we had as a legacy from Descartes and from biomechanical assumptions was that we were 2D, we were two-dimensional. We're made of levers, which are two-dimensional forms, and we are an upright inverted pendulum. And that's the spell we're under. And we're round. Just like the planet in the cosmos, we are round. Just the cells deep inside the body are round, and they're pressed together by membranes around them, and they are surrounded by those membranes just as we are surrounded by gravity. And the fascia was thrown away. Now, it wasn't until 200 years ago when John Godman looked at the fascia and thought that it was the most fascinating organ of the body, and that was 200 years ago, but he knew of no greater impediment to its understanding than the installation of a new idea. And then 100 years after that, Andrew Taylor Still, the father of osteopathy, spoke about the fascia as the living waters in which dwells the soul of man. So the first piece of magic about the fascia that I want to share with you is that the modern technology that we now have to measure it, and thanks to work from people like Jaap van der Waal, who did a tissue sparing dissection whereby he took out everything that wasn't the fascia and found that the ghost form of all of us is formed in the fascia. And he went on to study embryology when his paper wasn't originally accepted in 1985, but he presented it at the International Fascia Research Congress in 2009 in Amsterdam. And what we discover, and I recommend anyone to look up Jaap van der Waal's work, is that the embryo in us self-assembles. And the embryo in us self-assembles via this sensory fabric of our form, which means that you're the architect who self-assembled the architecture through which to express yourself as the architect. And you did it out of one piece. You did it as one piece of bioorganic origami, folded, enfolded, and unfolded into this, into you, exactly as you are. And what we now know about the fascia is that it is the most minute, microscopic connection of the sarcomeres within the fibrils of the muscles, within the muscle fibers, and the muscle fibers are myofascia. And we know that the fabric of the cells is inside that is the same pattern of very, 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 very fine fascia. And that the back of the skin is the soft tissue. If you rub it like that, you'll find that that's the superficial fascia. If you press a little bit harder, you've on the deep fascia. And as we go down through the body, we have different densities of fascia, right down to the bone, which is crystallized fascia. So we have tendon, which is very dense, twisted fascia. We have tendons, which are tensioned fascia. Tubes, we have sheets called aponeurosis. We have the dura of the nerves are all wrapped in this material. The dura is fascia. The wrappings of the blood vessels, the tunicae, our fascia, and it's spirals and tubes of this fascial fabric that's self-assembled by you. You already connected yourself to yourself from the get-go. Something, some anima animus that you call you, self-assembled you into who you are, and everything in you is already connected. And it's connected as the anima animus. So the magic that I really want to share with you today is that you are the subtle body that we talk about in yoga that you have. And I want to explain how that happens in the simplest possible way. But I want to give you a little movie to give you a sense of it, because one of the myths that or spells that we've been under in biomechanics and also in embryology is that somehow we formed as these separate parts, but we self-assembled everything together all at once in tubes, pockets, pouches, in total continuity. When we were embryos, our mothers, and we all have one, did not go into hospital and have limbs bolted on. We self-assembled in complete collective connectivity with her, wrapped in the beautiful amniotic fluid, and we grew and grew and grew and grew as a whole, as a round thing. Trust me, any mother out there, you know what I'm saying. And then we came together and squeezed, and she squeezed us, and we came out. And it's called labor. It's hard, and we can do hard things, and transformation is a hard thing to do. And I'm going to read you a little clip from a book, and then I'm going to show you a movie so that we can get on to how we formed ourselves as a system of webs. And we're going to talk about the forms of those webs and make a bit of sense of this kind of magic change in the recognition and the realization that understanding the fascia as our sensory architecture pops us into a completely new paradigm. It's rewriting the books, and it's changing our view of how we learn how to self-care. And we might almost change that around to reveal our self-caring. So I'm just going to read you something from Glennon Doyle, who is my current favorite author. She's written a book called Untamed that I recommend everybody on the planet reads. And she wrote, "I wrote myself a new memo about what it means to have strong faith. To me, faith is not a public allegiance to a set of outer beliefs, but a private surrender to the inner knowing." And then she adds, "I had been deceived. The only thing that was ever wrong with me was my belief that there was something wrong with me. I quit spending my life trying to control myself and began to trust myself." And the more I've studied fascia over the last 25 years, and the more I work with people as a movement and a manual therapist, when we start revealing this inner net that is so magically put together, we start recognizing that it is one resonance field. And I know a lot of my colleagues have talked about resonance. A lot of my colleagues have talked about frequency. And a lot of my colleagues have talked about singing. And we're going to talk about sounding. And Dr. Nicole Schnackenberg, who did the most beautiful presentation, I think it was last Tuesday, I can't recommend highly enough, because that pattern of how our matter of our fascia forms is really beautifully honored by chanting. And we're going to do a very simplified version of that today, but we're going to do a few things. First of all, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I can do this and show you a little movie.
When a spider builds its web, something extraordinary happens. The spider tunes individual strands of silk by stretching or shortening them. Each strand vibrates at a different frequency. When a bug hits the web, the spider can triangulate where it is by sensing the pattern of the vibrations. By plucking a thread and reading the nature of the vibrations that come back, the spider can tell the difference between a tasty meal and a potential mate.
Now, that beautiful piece is based on a paper called The Sound of the Silken Sound. It's on the video. You can have a look at it, and thank you for Beth for creating that paper and Skunk Bear for creating that beautiful film. It's genius. And I wonder if we can hold our fascial matrix as our silken web and imagine that we also formed that web under tension. A spider's web is a tension compression structure. So it creates those, what we call compression struts, which require a frame on the outside. And then it weaves the web in between that tensions everything together. And what that means is you only have to touch one bit of the web and the whole web moves, and the resonance moves through the entire web. And this is on every scale. This is on the organelles to the cell to the organs to the organism that is us, to the organic planet upon which we are a collective. I believe the fascia just gets finer and finer and actually webs our electromagnetic field, if you will. And my colleague John Sharkey, clinical anatomist, was doing a presentation recently showing that it is the black matter of space. It's not empty space outside, and there's no empty space inside. There's no empty space between us. There is just a very, very subtle version of a similar matter. Now, we wear our frame on the inside. We are much more sophisticated in some ways than the spider. I say some ways, that's a different conversation. And that web is not just sensory because it has sensory neurons in the actual fabric. It's sensory because it can make sound by being tensioned. So we're not just a compression stack of bones stacked one on top of each other like a column, the tilting of which would threaten our structure. We are self-assembled, what we call living tensegrities, because we can balance in space. I have a beautiful mask here that models the spine, and we have tension and compression webbing that allows us to make all kinds of positions, and our architecture is so designed in the round that we can, because of the fascial matrix, hold ourselves up as yogis. We know we can stand on our heads, we can stand on our hands, we can flick flack around the room, and our heads don't fall off. Everything stays tensioned together. So we wear our frame on the inside. We form ourselves in many different ways, and embryologically we form and fold in this bioorganic origami. And I'm just going to spend 2 minutes giving you the very, very fast track part of the embryo which inspires me. And that is, the first thing to beat is the heart, about the site of the 8th chakra, above what's going to be the crown. And that heartbeat feeds blood to the growing brain, which sends it over the body, pushing the heart down to a place opposite, somewhere in the region of the 4th chakra. At the same time, the growing brain is growing this way, and it's growing down the back. And when the spine, or what's going to be the spine, is opposite the heart, a diaphragm forms across. It's going to be the diaphragm called the septum transversum. And then the spine grows down the back, chakras 3, 2, 1, and wraps around the body, incorporating the heart, and the face unfolds, and the sensory matrix of the face unfolds up from the heart. So we are designed heart first. The heart feeds the brain. And when it's incorporated and we unfold from it, it grows buds. The first 2 buds are the lung buds wrapped around it. So every breath already hugs the heart. Then these 2 limb buds grow, and they grow under tension. So the potential bone, there's no bones in an embryo, grows very, very, very fast like this, and it's tensioned. And this is like a neoprene wetsuit. It's already under tension. And what that means is we're strung like an instrument. Leonardo da Vinci's absolutely beautiful drawings of the throat and the neck and the head, he draws the body more like an instrument. And he designed flutes and instruments based on the larynx, the pharynx, and the windpipe. And the muscles and bones of us, all made of fascia with different content. Hyaline for the cartilage to make it like nylon, hydroxyapatite or calcium in the bones to make them stiffer. So what happens is we have to start thinking of all our body parts as an orchestra of instruments. And what some of you will know is that if you have 2 harps either end of a room and they're tuned the same, and you pluck the E string on one, the other E string will sound. We are already a resonance field. And one of the things that understanding fascia allows us to do is recognize that the reason why singing works is because the vagus nerve is tensioned, because the sternocleidomastoid and the lungs are tensioned, and they move in the round. The lungs, we breathe, and there's no levers in nonlinear biologic forms. We're made of closed kinematic chain organizations of all different kinds. And the inhale expands and the exhale releases, and the inhale expands and the exhale releases. And then we can squeeze the exhale to squeeze more breath out and expand it. But we live in the middle. We live in the middle. We don't live closed and we don't live fully open. We live in the middle. And within that middle range is a spectrum. And that spectrum is something that we manage with what I like to call a volume control. Now, when I said about the embryo, that the heart starts above the crown and comes into the body and emerges, we unfold from it. What that basically means is that your tongue, this amazing thing, is actually a continuation of your heart. The pericardium of the heart and the tongue, from a myofascial point of view, are one continuous piece. In fact, your whole body is one continuous piece. And before we go into what we're going to do with the tongue to modulate, I want you to just see what happens with tissue. Piece of paper, I can pull it this way, and it stays the same. But if I change its shape by folding it, just by folding it, I've now given it properties of elasticity, of resilience. It can maintain its shape and it changes its behavior. And if I then fold that again, I now have a completely different kind of shape, a different morphology. And this is how we form ourselves using the same piece of fabric, but it expresses itself in a million different ways. This piece of paper has little cuts in it. And we know from the work of Neil Thies that we have what's called the interstitium, which is the in-between of everything in us. It's all made of fascia, but look at the properties. Same piece of paper, it's just got little cuts in it in a particular organization. It's threaded together. But we are whole and complete, already whole and complete. So we are formed more like a tube. So that piece of paper was only ever one tube. And if we take that one tube, always, always 3 or multi-dimensional. That one tube moves and changes shape, but there's still only one piece. It's still one piece. And we actually are more than 3-dimensional. We're at least 4-dimensional. A 4-dimensional figure folds through itself. And if we fold that through itself, what we now have is a tube made of a tube. And what you can see there is in fact a model of a spinal disc. And if I twist it again, I have a model of the ligaments in the knee, the anterior and posterior longitudinal ligaments. All you need to know is that every single shape out of that same piece of paper is expressed, if you like, as a different instrument. We have percussion instruments in our body. That would be the diaphragms, the pelvic floor, the drum skin, the thoracic inlet, the floor of the mouth, the roof of the mouth. These are the lateral diaphragms of us, and that's how the fascia is organized laterally. We have the strings of the tendons, all one piece. Myofascia muscles are not separate anywhere. They are the turnkeys. They are the keys on the guitar that tighten the strings, which tunes our web that we formed in 360 degrees. Now, the conductor of all that is the heart. It syncopates our rhythm. And the composer of our music may be the brain, but every single part of us is a musician in the orchestra. And one of the things that we can do with the breath and with sound and with gesture is tune our orchestra to bring it into harmony with our surroundings. Now, for some of us, the harmony with our surroundings is being on our own at home. I suffer from asthma, and despite being a yoga therapist and a manual therapist, I have to take extreme care of myself at the moment and be in relative isolation. So thank God for networks like this, resonating with the network like this. Everything in our lives is about the resonance field that we create and the frequency that we create ourselves to be. And one of the master musicians in our bodies is the tongue. So I'm going to give you 3 things very quickly, because I want to leave 10 minutes for you to give me questions if you have them. Remember I said that the embryo forms the lung buds that are already hugging the heart. So every breath you take is a hug. And the conductor, the heart, is conducting this orchestra. And when we go into chaos, it's a little bit like we're tuning up. And one of the ways that we can tune in is that when we wake up in the morning, we do a yawning stretch. There's research on why this is so important to our myofascia. When we open the mouth and we let the tongue go and we yawn. See if you can do it with me. And it's like a lengthening contraction. It's like we pull in and we push out at the same time in the sphere of us, the kinesphere of us. And it gives us a harmonizing of the inner sphere with the kinesphere, if you like. It's very hard to talk in the round. It's very hard to describe things in 4D, I'm telling you. So lovely big yawning stretch in the mornings. And then one of the first things we're going to do with the coronavirus around is wash our hands. So I'm going to ask you to do this with me. We're going to do it dry, but imagine that you're washing your hands. Remember, palm to palm, back of the hands. You're actually crushing the virus, and it's a fat-borne virus. So the soap is really important to lather up and make bubbles, which is the magic of fascia. It's all bound, fluid, liquid crystal. There you go. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Make that lovely sound, because that's resonating through your tissue. There you go. And that's the sound of rubbing your hands in glee, even if you've only got a small thing to be happy about in that moment. And then I'm going to invite you to hold your hands an inch apart. So we're using our hands as the orchestra. Now remember, these grew from the heart under tension. That's your heart. That's the other end of your heart. In the horizontal, in the lateral plane of this tube called you. This is the vertical plane of the tube called you. So you can feel that resonance between your hands. And now bring your hands together in a heart-to-heart gesture with yourself. And one of the very beautiful things about music, if you think about it, is that the conductor has to play the pauses. So that's the next thing. We've yawned, rubbed our hands together, played the pauses. Everyone is washing their hands, right? Everyone. Back of the hands, between the digits, the thumbs, the fingers, all the fingers into the palm, into the palm. Make it fun, make a sound, make bubbles. The magic of fascia is actually communicating your caretaking of you back to your heart. That's a gesture of self-care. And then the last thing we're going to talk about is humming. So I'm going to invite you to place your thumbs on your breastbone and your fingers under your chin. This is the matrix in which the vagus nerve calms everything, but we have to look at having a relaxed tongue. And this is one of the keys to just giving the heart a pause. This is how we play the pauses. We need to relax the tongue, and we have the power to do that. And I offer this to you even before you start chanting and doing some of the work that Nicole did. Relax the tongue. When we don't relax the tongue, the voice sounds like this. If I tighten my tongue, let me think of a pet peeve. Levers. There are no levers in nonlinear biologic forms, and you are a nonlinear biologic form. Can you hear how that? Horrible. I remember when my son was a little boy, and I used to get very cross with him sometimes because he was naughty. He was gorgeous but naughty. And he used to just stand there and say, "Mummy, you've got that in your voice." Because the truth is, we are completely sound oriented. The fascia is the largest sensory organ of the body. It is tuned to resonance in every aspect of us. And it is also our listening device. And we get to listen to ourselves. So listen is an anagram for silent. So when we go silent and we go within, just for a moment, just for a pause, listen to how you sound. And a beautiful way to relax the tongue, place the hands like this, place the tongue between the teeth, and go, Now, one of the things that made you laugh about the skunk bear film of the spider was the little noises that it made. So we can make little noises. You know the teenage noise? I don't know. We can make soothing noises. And one of the things we can do is hum with a relaxed tongue. So this, gently putting the tongue between the teeth, and practicing making really silly noises on your own in front of the mirror, you can do it, helps to relax the tongue. So does gargling, by the way. You can make noises like that, and swallowing regularly, great, because if you've got the coronavirus in your throat, you'll take it down to your stomach and your hydrochloric acid will sort it out. I'm not saying that lightly, I'm not saying that easily. I know we can't all do it, but obviously we're all cleaning our hands, cleaning our teeth. By gargling, you're having fun and you're helping yourself. So, humming. Here we go. Place the thumbs together, middle fingers, the heart, under the chin. Lovely, light, deep breath in. Relax the tongue. So that's amazing grace, because that's where I live, that it's amazing grace that we can all be together in this way. And it's amazing grace that we are connected to ourselves and connected to each other. And it's amazing grace that we are now in an era that can measure this magical aspect of our form. I think fascia is the multi-dimensional page, the origami upon which your life story is written. And can you hear how much more pleasant it is to listen to me when I consciously relax my tongue? And it's a softening, a sounding of consonants. So what we're doing is recognizing this ability to use our voice to modulate sound. We have a volume control. And what we know about the fascia as the largest sensory organ of our body is that we are sensing our way into form all the time. Since we were an embryo till we are an elder, we are the watchmaker. Our fascia is our temporal nature. We come and we go. Can we modulate how we send the breath through us, that respiration, that re-spiriting, that thing that we don't have the power to stop? We can't suffocate ourselves by holding our breath. Our body, our syncopated instruments will tell the heart, the master conductor, that the music isn't right, and we'll pass out and carry on breathing. Something greater than us is breathing us. And what I invite you to do with your humming is hum the resonance all the way through your whole body and allow yourself to breathe heart to heart, hand to hand, heart to heart. And after I wash my hands, I put my hands in a heart shape and I let the water run down them and I say thank you, just because I can. My heart to yours. I'm sorry I've talked almost into our time. We've got 4 minutes of questions. I just want you to know that your fascial matrix is your web of wisdom. And that spells wow. Wow. You already grew you. You are already connected. You are already a resonance field. Your fascia is already listening to you 24/7. It already knows. Have faith in your fascia. Play its music in harmony with the situation you're in. If you're a care worker and you're on high demand, you will raise your game and you will meet that challenge. And then when you need to stop, press pause, play the pauses, wash your hands as a gesture of love to you and hum, hum. And before I did this talk, I got very nervous because I absolutely knew I wouldn't have question time. So please contact me and give me your questions. I'm more than happy to sit here all day answering. And thank you each for showing up. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, anybody who's reading this. This is the magic of the multi-dimensional being, the multi-sensory being. And at last we can bring anatomy, physiology, biology, psychology, grace together in this resonance field. Your fascia conducts light through your body. There's extensive research to show that. You are a sound instrument. You are many instruments. And I actually think of the tongue as one of the master musicians, one of those extraordinary musicians that can play many, many things in the orchestra, but actually gives away a great deal. So welcome to my world of fascia. It's completely magical. And I send each one of you love and a resonance of harmony. And this is hard. As Glennon Doyle says, we can do hard things. And sometimes the hard thing feels like grit and it feels hard to swallow. But remember that the grit in the oyster is what turns into a pearl. And when a caterpillar goes into its chrysalis, its cocoon, it metamorphosizes into a butterfly inside that cocoon. But before it emerges, the butterfly is just a big fat bug with empty filaments in these folded things called wings. and it has to go through a very, very small hole. And that very small hole engorges all the bug body into the wing filaments and opens the wings and fills them. And what emerges is the butterfly. And you see its wings unfolding and they have to dry. And if you help that butterfly open that hole, it dies because its wings are not engorged. So I know this is a hard journey for all of us, whatever it is that we're doing. I pray we emerge as butterflies, and I absolutely know that every single one of you is already magical and brilliant at being you. God bless.